Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks. Can I have your attention just for some health and safety announcements? There's emergency exits as usual at the back of the room and over here, and if you require any assistance during this meeting with the policing authority, there are members of my team here in the room. Just to be aware, as usual, the event is streamed live, so switch the mobile phones off or on silent, and anybody present can be captured as part of the record. Silence at all times. The interaction is between the authority members and the Garda Síochána, and if you need to leave the room during the meeting, just please do so quietly. Thank you very much. Chairperson.
Good afternoon. My name is Elaine Byrne. I'm Chair of the Policing Authority. There are 4 items on our agenda today, which will begin at 3 o'clock and conclude at 5 o'clock, so 2 hours. The first item, Mr. Paul McGeehan will discuss public order policing, and Mr. Anthony Harbison will then discuss the PEMS system, known as the Garda Síochána Property Management System, and then Ms. Debbie Donnelly and Jane Mulcahy will discuss the policing plan and commitments to the public and Garda personnel, and then I will briefly look at the new PSCS Act. And our next meeting will be held in private on the 31st of October next, but like this meeting and all meetings, the minutes are available to the public online. So before we begin the formal agenda, Commissioner, I just have a couple of questions in relation to the recent inquiry, scoping exercise into historical child sex abuse in Irish schools. And if you could give us an update, please, on that scoping inquiry.
As of yesterday, and following our first public appeal on the 4th of September, there have been 522 contacts made to Garda Síochána. The great majority of these are from men, and the great majority of the complaints being received are in respect of sexual abuse, the remainder then being physical abuse. So we ourselves then are then commencing the process of investigation, analysis of these complaints and investigation. There is a proportion of these cases where we do have prior knowledge of those against which the allegations have been made. They've previously been suspects or indeed individuals who've been convicted of offences, and a proportion of them are now deceased. So that work's commencing. In respect of the scoping study overall, there are several bits of work for us. I think the first one is just responding to these initial contacts and the subsequent investigation. And again, we've already issued 2 appeals, and we would reiterate that today in terms of those individuals who wish to make contact with us, either as victims or indeed witnesses, that they should do so. Secondly, on analysis of the scoping report itself, we ourselves need to have a more thorough corporate knowledge of the work that's been done over the last 25 years. The PULSE system is not adept at drawing that out, so there was a huge amount of investigative effort put in maybe 20 to 25 years ago, and we need to have a better understanding collectively at a corporate sense of what was done then. But then beyond that, then the scoping study does talk about institutions ignoring or suppressing this horrendous problem, these horrendous crimes. So again, then we have to wait, obviously, to the terms of reference for a commission, but we're very conscious then about the preservation of any documentation that the search for, and then the preservation of any documentation which would be useful to the Commission in their future terms of reference. We haven't seen those yet, but it is reasonable to presume that when that is highlighted in the scoping report, it will be an area of concentration over the years ahead.
And you've alluded to it there, Commissioner. The report refers to institutional cover-up, which would include many institutions of the state, potentially the Garda Síochána. What do you have to say to that?
We are specifically mentioned by name in the report, so we have to obviously take that very seriously. that's something that we will have to draw up our own terms of reference for. One, for searching for the documentation, for the evidence, and then secondly then seeing is there investigations that we would need to conduct in a criminal sense, a criminal investigation, but also then be in a position to thoroughly inform the new Commission on what we know and where documentation may also lie as well. So I think this is a very considerable piece of work, and the scope of inquiry has laid bare just the extent of the abuse, the numbers involved, and also then the scope of inquiry makes clear where our provision of information was deficient, and we have to obviously rectify that between now and the new Commission commencing its work.
And what would you say to people who have not yet come forward, or who have read your comments to date, or have seen people come forward?
Well, I would appeal to them to come forward. We have our Protective Services Bureau nationally in every division. We have a national bureau as well. We do have experience of these big investigations. Obviously, they take effort and time, but you are dealing with people who are specifically trained. They're very professional in their approach to this, and obviously your complaint to us is dealt with properly, thoroughly, and with great confidentiality as well.
People will be listened to.
Yes, people will be listened to, yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to turn to the first item on the agenda. Sorry, Paul has a follow-up.
Yeah, just one clarification, Commissioner. You discussed the aspect of the investigation into the possibility of institutional cover-up of allegations. If the investigation leads to evidence of individuals being involved in that sort of activity, they are individuals that may be subject to criminal prosecution?
Well, certainly subject to investigation, and we report them to the Director of Public Prosecutions. If there are specific allegations then against members of Garda Síochána, then that may be for the Ombudsman then to deal with.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to turn now to our first item on the agenda, which is the Public Order Policing Report. And just by way of explanation to the public who may be watching this, this is a report that was commissioned by the Minister for Justice in the wake of the riots in Dublin in November of last year. And since that time, the authority has engaged in an extensive discussion with all ranks of Garda Síochána, and including those on the front lines that day, facing that terrible day, and various statutory agencies as well. We submitted our report to the Minister for Justice at the start of August, and I met with the Minister earlier this week to discuss the report, and I understand it is her intention to publish the report in due course. And I now turn to Mr. Paul Meegan, who will discuss the findings and recommendations of the report.
Thank you, Elaine. I have a couple of questions, Commissioner, first in relation to the discussion that we had at the July meeting, mainly focusing on events at Coolock. I suppose one point of clarification, first of all, in July, in response, I think, to a question from me about when Garda Síochána were alerted to the contractor at Coolock wanting to get on to the site on the 15th of July, you said that there had been a meeting with the local superintendent on the 10th of July. So in other words, that the guards had 5 days notice. On the RTE primetime programme a week or 10 days ago, there was an interview with the contractor which appeared to take place, I think, just outside Coolock Garda Station, where it was indicated that there were 3 weeks notice given in advance of the 15th of July. Which of those accounts is correct?
Please, sure.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good afternoon. So, in relation to the assertion on the programme that you reference in relation to a meeting on the 12th of June, there was a meeting on the 12th of June between the Superintendent and Coolock and relevant contractors. And at that meeting, a tentative date of the 15th of July was put forward for potential works at the site. However, there were many things to happen in the interim, including contact with the department, including ascertaining whether or not it would be feasible and possible to get security, to get contractors in order to undertake the work. So at the conclusion of that meeting, and I suppose I should say, in the course of that meeting, there was a request made by the contractor to bring an RTE producer into the meeting, which was absolutely declined by the superintendent, and it appears that that RTE person may have been in the car park of Coolock Garda Station. So that request was declined by the superintendent. There was a tentative date provided of the 15th of July. However, they were to come back to the superintendent. There was an agreement that there would be a minimum of 7 days' notice provided of any intended works to commence to the guards in Coolock to enable relevant planning to take place. So then on the 10th of July was the next contact with the superintendent, and the contractor indicated that it was his intention to commence work during the night of the 15th of July, so the early hours of Sunday morning into Monday morning. Sunday night into Monday morning. The superintendent expressed concern that it was very short notice and that he may not be in a position to have an appropriate amount of resources for that occasion because there were other competing demands happening in the city. There was a full house event on in Croke Park on the Sunday. There was another event on in the Three Arena, and the superintendent would have been aware of those demands because when those types of events are on, there's a requirement to move people from around the city in to support whatever the major events are that are happening. So the superintendent was aware that there were other competing demands, and it would be a challenge to put a policing plan in place on time. But in any event, the contractor was adamant that he was moving forward with his plan on the Sunday night. So at that point, a plan was developed in relation to facilitating the movement of a number of lorries and contractors onto the site during the night of the 15th of July.
All right, sorry, just one very brief follow-up on that. Between the 12th of June and the 10th of July, therefore, that second meeting, there was no further meetings between the contractor and the local superintendent?
No.
Okay. On the prime time programme, Commissioner, there was extensive footage of threats being made to employees, allegations of assault were discussed, criminal damage, etc. I know there have been arrests as a result of Coolock. In fact, I think you updated us on the last occasion about the number of those arrests. Have arrests been made in relation to some of those specific incidents that are recorded in the programme?
Well, we've, I understand, received the footage today, so that was shown on prime time. So we're going to have to assess that against the other evidence that we've gleaned in the interim. There have been 34 arrests and 26 individuals are charged before the courts. So we have to see are these individuals that we haven't previously arrested and haven't been charged, or is this further evidence against existing individuals who've been arrested or charged? So that work will have to commence. But in the main, it has to be said that footage was new to us. We didn't understand that or didn't know the extent of the footage that was available through, in effect, what looks like body-worn camera devices, and that includes footage of offences being committed up to and including serious criminal damage and ultimately also a very serious assault. So we're anxious to get that footage and analyse it.
Okay, thank you. Since the July meeting, Commissioner, you've said that the decision to stand down the public order unit at 7 a.m. was a mistake or was regrettable. I can't remember the exact word that you used. You didn't say that at the July meeting to us, and I'm just wondering, what has led you to that conclusion now? I don't think either I was defending either the position of finishing the public order unit at 7 a.m. Our response colleagues on the Corps were left in a very difficult position between probably about 10 a.m.
up to 1 p.m. So it was a very difficult 3 hours for them to contain that. And I think I said at the last meeting that that was very far from perfect in terms of our ability to respond to the evolving situation. But that public order unit had been on throughout the night. They had been on night duty. 7 a.m. would have been their normal finishing time, and a decision was taken to allow them to finish at that. In hindsight, and a lot of things are very clear in hindsight, that wasn't the correct decision, given what then subsequently developed at the Crown Paint site throughout the morning.
And just on, and you're absolutely right to say that you didn't strongly defend the decision to stand down the unit on the last occasion, and you did say that there was learning, I think, that had to be taken from that. But it's pretty clear, I think, from around about 8 o'clock and certainly from 10 o'clock that the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Is that 3-hour gap appropriate, or are you? I know that you had told us that people were deployed to Coolock Garda Station at noon, but they weren't actually deployed to the scene until 1. In light of the not just in light of the primetime programme, but in light of some of the events that we've seen in the primetime programme, should the public order unit not have been deployed more quickly?
Well, if I might turn to Magella, because there was a series of operational decisions being made in terms of responding to what was happening actually on the ground. There was an inspector who was in charge and who was in communication then back with Coolock. And as I said previously, public order units were arriving at Coolock and were mustering then in terms of their initial response. So, Magella, can you add just to decision making in the morning?
Good afternoon. The first call that was received was at 8:10 from the security site to say that there were protesters outside, that they weren't threatening, but that they were shouting and roaring, and that call was first responded to by the local unit at 8:20. There were a series of calls over the course of the next hour, and additional units were dispatched. At 10:22, the priority call to control was escalated to emergency, and at that point 6 units were dispatched, including armed support units and the special detective unit. The patrol officer was made aware, and the patrol officer then went to the scene. But by 10 to 11, there were 24 units dispatched. Public order units were starting to scramble at that point. The traffic diversion had been put in place at both ends of the Malahide Road at that point. So, as far as I'm concerned, there was a Garda response, and it was escalated throughout the morning until such time as the public order unit were scrambled and came to scene. But they were scrambling when I arrived to Coolock Garda Station at 10 to 12 that morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Chief Superintendent, thank you. Turning, Commissioner, now to the report that the Chair introduced, the public order report that we sent to the Department in early August. You've had it for some time, I think, since then as well. And I know that you've been able to digest that. The report goes over some of the ground that a previous Garda Inspectorate report looked at in 2019 in an inspection on public order policing. But I know that the Garda view was of the 20 Garda Inspectorate recommendations that were made in 2019, that 18 had been implemented or partly implemented. The view of the authority, based on the work that was done since November last year, is that only 12 of those recommendations were implemented or partly implemented. Do you accept that view?
Well, yes, I'm not going to take issue with the report, and the authority is kind enough to share the report with us prior to publication. And so, in good faith, we are looking through the report and wish to be in a position then to meet the recommendations and the observations within. It's entirely reasonable then that we would act then on those recommendations. I think it has to be said that the situation around public order in 2019 was very different from the scenario we face at the moment, and like our response has evolved very considerably since 2019 as well. And I think the recommendations of 2019, when set against actually the problems of 2023 into 2024, can be read in a different light. So we entirely accept the points made, and really what we want to do is enact the recommendations and work through just the learning there is from this report. That's entirely accepted.
Okay, thank you. And I think you're right. I think the authority would agree entirely that the context for public order policing has changed radically in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. I suppose one of the that underlines the importance of one of the issues that was identified in the report, which is that the public order policies that the guards were relying on date from 2017. Now, I know a lot of work has been done, I think, in the last number of months to update those policies. We still haven't seen them. Can you tell us when exactly they will be available?
So where we are with these are they've been, in effect, approved by the executive. The senior leadership team has been involved in they've been written, and now they're with the staff associations for 3 weeks just for any feedback. But it is a complete refresh of our policy approach, and it actually couples it with events, and so that this is a holistic approach to the public events, both public safety and also then public order events, and therefore then the command structure around those as well. So it's an important piece of work, and I would say then within 4 weeks we will be at a final product once we get the feedback from the associations, because there is important elements there for every ranking and Garda Síochána within them.
Yeah, and obviously they go to one of the sort of critical risks identified both in the inspectorate report and in the authority report, which is insufficient central governance and coordination in the organisation around public order. And while the context may well have changed, as you've said, and I completely agree with that, I think that the recommendations both from the inspectorate and from ourselves are still valid, particularly in that context. Can you tell me if they're at that advanced stage? Because one of the criticisms, I think, has been that there hasn't been a clear lead on public order, coordination and training, etc. Have you decided to go for regional assistant commissioners leading on public order, or is it the steering group, or can you tell us that?
No, coordination remains with the steering group, and that's under AC Helen's direction. And in effect then, in responding to the report, additional resources have been made available then to Paula so that she can carry out her responsibilities in respect of this. And I think the reason why this is important, and I know there's focus on Coolock here this afternoon, but we've had instances right across the country where we've successfully diffused situations which could have been volatile and very difficult, and through a policing approach, and we want to make sure then that the learning from that is shared at a national level. So it's entirely appropriate then that there's a central authority in respect of this in terms of both what the policy is and also then consistency and a uniform approach around our tactics and the equipment that we have available to us. I might ask Paula just to maybe set out just what her work entails in this regard, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, so the National Public Order Steering Group has representation from across the organisation. I chair it. It has operational regional representation. It has representation from finance, from fleet, from procurement for the equipment, and from training. So it is a large steering group, and from that are all of the other different working groups that allow us then to deliver the multiple projects of work that we have been delivering in relation to public order and public safety. And I think as the Commissioner talked about there as well, it's recognising that public order is one tactic and a tactical contingency to consider when you're planning any operation. So the new policy takes into account about event planning and events leads, where 90% of our events will go off without incident, but needs a very strong public safety approach and learning in that. So That's what we have been working on. You know, we have coordinated a lot of equipment. I mean, over the last 2.5 years, we spent in the region of 3.7 million on public order equipment for all our members across the organisation. We are increasing our fleet. We currently have 27 vehicles. We've just spent 1.4 million and are in the at the minute delivering another 15 vehicles across the country, and we are looking at that. And when we're doing that, we work collaboratively, yes, with the operational ACs, but also from that central coordination point, I'm able to take into account the resourcing we have across the country, the number of protests we have across the country, and propose then that allocation to the executive of where new equipment and new fleet should go to. So it's very much working with the college. We've already delivered, we're delivering 2 training courses this year, and then they start the rollout for tactical commanders next year. So there's a lot of work that is coordinated by all of the members of that steering group.
Okay, thank you, Assistant Commissioner. I mean, one of the issues, I think that and maybe back to you in this, Commissioner, at least in the first instance, one of the issues that the authority report identified is that there was an issue between the regional ACs and the steering group, in that there wasn't necessarily the sort of leadership of the steering group was not necessarily being followed and taking the lead in public order. Are you confident that with the introduction of the new policy that will change?
Well, I would say that's changed already. There is the importance of just the coordination of our overall approach and the understanding then at the senior leadership team level about where the responsibility lies, and therefore then how to then improve and get equipment, purchase, procurement, and introduction of new policy and a new training. All of these are very considerable tasks, and they are national tasks for the whole organisation as well. So the coordination of this is achieved through Paula's offices. So we have acted upon the commentary that we've already seen in the report in respect of that recommendation, and that's allowed us to move quickly around accessing new equipment, making changes. We've seen that in terms of the increased strength of the incapacitating spray, changing our tactics to introduce round shields, the stadium tactics that have been trained throughout this year, but also then today I signed off on the procurement of 2 anti-riot vehicles, each with capacity to carry 5,200 litres of water, so maybe more commonly known as water cannon. So just having that coordination and a focus then in terms of obtaining equipment allows us to be agile then in obtaining equipment, which allows us then to follow through on what we've said in terms of our policies and practices around managing public order.
And maybe just to add to that as well, the Commissioner referenced about the equipment, that national unit now as well. We look at all the debriefs and the learning from the various events. So, for example, we after the independent debrief took place the 23rd of November. Then it was passed to me and the team to look at the recommendations to see, and we could see the vast majority were either already implemented or being implemented, and the same with Coolock. We have the observations from Coolock, so we'll be looking at that to see what are the themes, what is it, are there any areas that we need to develop for equipment, and that's why we were able to respond very quickly to get new equipment previously. But the other thing as well is showing where things have actually gone well and sharing that good practice, so as well that where members are, because a lot of our members, a lot of events have gone well, and it's equally so that the events that we will be having both in training and workshops throughout the year is, yes, okay, if there are areas for learning, but also sharing where good practice where it's happening, and that does happen as well. So I think we've got to balance that as well, where we are sharing the learning where things have gone
Paul,
well.
Could I just come in there? Assistant Commissioner Hillman, how many protests have there been this year? Just to give, I suppose, an indication, as we often focus on the high-profile incidents, but overall, how many protests have there been this year?
Yeah, there's been 862 protests this year. That's, if you look at last year, this is for the same period, so this is from January to the end of August. So if you look at last year, there were 553, and in 2022, 285. So overall, this year to date, that's an increase of 56%. We still see the highest volume, undoubtedly, in the DMR, but we are seeing in Eastern Region and Southern Region significant increases in their protest activity as well.
And the vast majority of those pass off peacefully.
Yes, they do.
Thank you. And I think one of the other findings, and it is important to stress, both in the context of what Assistant Commissioner Hillman said and what you've said, Commissioner, is that the report did find evidence of a clear commitment on the part of members to public order policing and to doing it properly and doing it well. So I think we need to recognise that and to explicitly say it. Just coming back to this issue, though, about the tension, if you like, between the steering group and the regional ACs, what will happen in the future if a regional AC says no, that they can't release members to be trained, or if there is a public order event and they don't apply the public order command model?
That'll be for myself and the deputy to manage through, because what we are developing, we hope is, and I think what will be, is a very responsive, adaptive and agile model to respond just to the vast array of protests and regrettably public order incidents that evolve. It does require commitment from us all. We need obviously trained members to undertake the public order duties. That's not particularly easy undertaking as well. It is a rigorous training course. It is a difficult training course, and the people who've undergone it take great pride in succeeding in it. But we also follow through then in terms of both that strategic and tactical command training as well, so that inspectors, superintendents, chief superintendents have the confidence as well to deal with these large-scale events. So, and everybody will be bought into the model of what the decision-making process is, and therefore then will require, in effect, the tools that we've said we'll use within our tactics available to them. So, in effect, the method by which we deal with this will drive the provision then of the necessary resources.
Sorry,
If I could just add, just to give you some reassurance, one, certainly the assistant commissioners have met with myself and all of us broadly together at SLT on this very issue, and there is alignment between all of us, and the policies have been reviewed by everyone at that level. So I know what you're speaking of in terms of hypothetically what could happen, but actually this has been a collaborative process that everyone has bought into. So as we sit right now, there is certainly alignment around this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think my question also reflected some of the reality that the authority found on the ground, but thank you for that answer, Deputy Commissioner. Commissioner, you've talked about the impact of this new approach on the ground, but obviously, as you've said as well, it needs to be communicated to ordinary members. How will that be done, and how long will that take? Well,
our individual public order members, they undergo their own refreshment training. So that's an ongoing process in terms of just the tactics that we're using. We're going to have to specifically train, obviously, then in respect of the water cannon. We have trained already in respect of the use of the canister incapacitant spray. So that's already done and delivered. And also then train in terms of the use of the round shields, which are smaller and lighter, and individuals then could be more mobile in respect of that. But we also then have to look to, I suppose, situational training then for other Garda members, so that if they are caught up in the public order situation, they know what their responsibilities are, and in effect, and how to keep themselves safe as well. So there's many elements to this, but we're not starting from point zero. We already have a cohort of individuals who are very well trained in public order, and what we're doing is adding to their skills. And secondly, then, we do already have a cohort of superintendents, chief superintendents, again well skilled in dealing with public order. What we're doing is increasing that cohort as well. So it's just ongoing, really continuous improvement of our response, commensurate to the situations that we're actually facing out in the ground. But I would point to the next element of this, and that's de-escalation and reconnection with the community, and that's an important element. It's just not about, you know, the public order equipment, etc. It is actually about how then we reset the relationship in a local area after an incident such as this, and in effect try and get to a place of normality as quickly as we can. And I'd be pleased to say, in respect of the disorder at Coolock, within, say, 3 or 4 nights, we had, in effect, Gardaí on beat patrol past the premises and past protesters. And that's very positive, and that's a very important element in terms of just, you know, successfully moving away from, you know, such anger and vitriol, and indeed offending and violent offending.
Okay, thank you. In the event that the new policies are put in place and the training takes place, and the information and the training is disseminated down to local members on the ground, what difference do you think this new approach will make on the ground in terms of the delivery of public order policing?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think that it's building on a lot of the structures that are already there, but taking them to that next level. And I think, as the Commissioner said, even what we've seen in the last 12 months has been very, very different. So, and we've been agile in those policies and updated them and developed them because of what we've seen. Like, if you had have said to me a year ago we'd be banned water cannon, that, you know, I mean, that just wasn't on our radar a year ago. But what I think it does, you know, we've already had a lot of briefing sessions with chief superintendents. They will all be trained in the next 2 months. You know, all our chief superintendents will be trained as strategic commanders. Then we will start to cascade that down to the tactical command training next year with operational superintendents. I think one of the other key areas as well is that we're currently working on, and it was one of the Garda Inspectorate reports, is the regional control centre training. So we have a team with a few people working on that, and I think that's going to be vital. So I think, because especially in spontaneous incidents, our regional control centres will have to manage that until we get the resource into place, and that's what it's like anywhere. If there's a spontaneous incident, you know, you have to hold the position, and then of course get everyone called in. So I think it allows, and there's further clarity on the structures to be put in place. I think they were always there. Chief superintendents knew, you know, how to declare a public order incident, but I think that gives that enhanced capability. We have supported that with literature. We have the operational domain. We have, you know, we've introduced in terms of the human rights response, the decision logs, and we've done a lot of work like that to support all our members. And I think as well the added support and our the added awareness of the role of tactical advisors, public order tactical advisors, and their role, who give that tactical advice to commanders. Ultimately, the decision sits with the commander in charge of that operation, but actually recognising and using our public order tactical advisors who have been trained to international standards and using them. So I think it's working with a lot of the training that was already in place, but developing the training, responding to what we've seen, looking at what has happened, and ensuring that our training is, as the Commissioner talked about, a lot of those new tactics that come in. You know, we trained those really quickly. Approval was given, approved as a tactic, and then working really closely with the college, as we're already doing, you know, in terms of we're already preparing the training for the water cannon that are coming in. So we will be prepared for that. So I think it allows us to have those structures in place, just to ensure that we have, in 2024, the capability and the capacity to respond to what we're seeing in this space.
Okay, thank you. I think that's almost all that I have, but I just did wonder, Commissioner, if we might hear from Chief Superintendent Armstrong again about the last point you made about restoring the relationships in the local community, specifically in Coolock.
Yes, certainly, as the Commissioner said, from a couple of days afterwards, we were back on the beat up and down past the site in the Darndale area. There have been numerous meetings between the Coolock Says No group and the local superintendent in the weeks and months that have gone by. They're back in the community in Darndale, which is where most of those residents are from. There's a very strong community policing presence there who go about their business on a daily basis and can work in that area and have ongoing conversations. So we're back in that community. We've also worked very closely with the Northside Partnership and with the Darndale Implementation Group, the wider group, in terms of restoring public confidence, and the visibility really is key to that.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. Thanks, Commissioner.
So, Commissioner, since this report was commissioned by the Minister in November of last year, and this conversation with the authority began with you and the leadership team and the ranks, it is fair to say that in a context where there has been, as Assistant Commissioner Hillman has outlined, an upsurge in protests in an era where it's post-COVID, where immigration is now a particular issue, and social media, that there has been a considerable amount of progress made in the period since November in terms of the training standards that have been outlined, in terms of central governance and coordination. With regard to policies, though policies the authority have not yet seen and are very anxious for us to see. And also there has been progress made in relation to well-being of your staff, and also in relation to equipment purchases that you've outlined. And these are issues that there will be ongoing review by the authority throughout the remainder of this year, and indeed going into 2025. So I don't know if there's anything you wish to add, Commissioner, in relation to the well-being of your staff, or additional purchases of equipment, or the progress in general that have been made on public order since the November riots of 2023.
In respect of equipment, we do buy the best equipment. We've spent, from the 1st of January 2023 to now, some 3.7 million on public order type equipment, protective equipment, and that doesn't include the cost of the water cannon that we're in the process of purchasing. But beyond that then, we're also responding to the associations in terms of, as you say, the equipment that is available to all Garda members, and that includes protective head equipment. So that is work which is ongoing, and we'd hope that the Uniform Committee will approve just a version of a hard hat, in effect, protective equipment pretty quickly, in the next few weeks. And then beyond that then, our ongoing care for our staff in terms of their welfare, that's an ongoing agenda. If we don't have the public order, we have plenty of our staff are involved in very traumatic incidents. The public order has put an extra weight on us, just in terms of both the difficult scenarios that Garda members find themselves in, but these are physically very draining as well. And later this year we will have a physio programme brought online where Garda members can avail of physio as well. And that's important, particularly for those engaged in public order, through the amount of equipment and the weight of the equipment that they have to deploy with, sometimes for hours. So we're always looking to see what we might do next around our staff, and it makes good business sense as well, because the support for them also then keeps them in the workplace as well. So in effect, it's a win-win in terms of just our resources and the health of our staff as well. Thank you.
So it is a fair comment, Commissioner, that reassurance can be given to the public that if the events of November of last year were to occur, in terms of strategy and equipment and resources available to you, and indeed how you now approach these things, are quite different to that time, that point in time.
Well, what we have is, as Paula said out already, the command structures are a good deal more slick, as happened on the morning of Coolock. The India Base Command Centre opened up, and then that was able to direct resources. So, and the coordination of resources is very important, particularly around these spontaneous incidents. Beyond that then as well, the equipment that I've already outlined in terms of incapacitant spray, the availability now of the water cannon to us, the additional tactics that we have, all mean then that we're able to have additional tactics that we can apply to such circumstances. We'll never have the exact thing happen again. And so we always need to make sure that our response is sufficiently agile to deal with the problem of any particular day or the issue of any particular day. But I think our approach does give us, both capability and capacity to be agile around the command of it, but also then the resources that we can bring to bear.
And this will be a constant focus of attention for the public or for the policing authority going forward. Paul, you have an additional question?
Just one point, Commissioner, just when you talked about welfare, etc., I had omitted to bring this up, but one of the points in the authority report was that while members did feel that there was quite a lot of institutional support within the organisation for them, that one thing that a number of them mentioned was a lack of direct sort of support the day after, let's say, an incident like this from their immediate supervisors or officers. And I just wondered whether or not you would want to make any comment in relation to that and what you would expect to see in those circumstances.
Well, I take that comment very seriously. We've had, in effect, a concentration on public order issues. We had a briefing day for the Chief Superintendents. All the ACs were in attendance as well. And one of the points we did emphasise was just, in effect, the support leadership that individuals need. And in lots of ways, our guards, our sergeants and inspectors know what they have to do, know what needs to be done, but it's good that there's someone there at a higher rank actually just to, in effect, give them the confidence that they are that making these difficult decisions, that they're on the right route and that they are following through in what is, proportionate and necessary in terms of what they're facing in front of them. And that does require, a level of seniority and experience as well. So that is being emphasised. It's certainly being emphasised in the training programme that we're outlining, and we're soon to have, in effect, a thematic day with our superintendents, and part of that will be around addressing public order. But I place huge emphasis on the support given to those who are doing the most difficult job and the riskiest job, which is actually in the front line, on the shield line, and the immediate supervision of that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Paul. I now turn to Anthony Harbison, who's going to talk about the Garda Síochána Property Exhibit Management System, known as PEMS.
Thank you. Commissioner, we've been discussing the Property Exhibit Management System, or PEMS, as the Chair said, for some months now, and I think we all recognise the importance of having a robust system in place, given the fact that this involves the storage and management of evidential items, including cash, drugs, firearms, etc., and the inherent risks that go with all of those. Can we start by sort of asking you, do you think we're in a better place now than we were, say, 6 months ago?
Please.
Yeah, I do think we're in a better place than we were, say, 6 months ago. I think very similar to the last topic, we just embarked on, that there's been a significant amount of focus and looking at where there are gaps and learning from those, and then improving our business processes around this issue.
Well, looking first at the gaps, you've had a recent inspectorate review.
Yeah.
Have you accepted all of the findings of that review?
Yes, we've responded to all of them, yes.
And then can I ask, perhaps, given the work that you've undertaken at both divisional and regional level on PEMS, can I ask if that work is concluded, and if it has, do the outcomes of the work reflect the respective recommendations from the inspectorate?
I would say we're not quite concluded, and I'll turn over to Barry in a minute if that's all right. But it is a work in progress, so we're not there yet. It is going to take some time to get everything fully completed. But I would say that we're in a more significant place than we were before. We've also had this added to our corporate risk register specifically so that we can keep focus on it until we feel that we're at a place where everything is implemented. And perhaps if there's anything you can add to that, Barry?
Yeah, so I think the report was aligned with a body of work we were doing in any event. So we were aware that PEMS it's an ongoing work in progress. So we had conducted a canvass of stakeholders, our users, to see what they required from an ICT perspective. We had engaged with developing the training process. We had engaged in reviewing and updating the associated policy and specifically within that the procedures. And there were three key areas that we are looking to make progress in, and we are making progress in.
Thank you, Barry. In July, the Commissioner said that quarterly assurance and inspections would be sought from divisions, and that there was going to be engagement with internal audit, professional standards and the Forensic Coordination Office. Can you tell me what progress has been made in respect of those engagements?
So in terms of, I suppose, our ambition was to have an enhanced corporate assurance process via the Professional Standards Unit inspection review system. In the interim period, I engaged with the superintendent in there, and there has been a new chief superintendent appointed to that particular section, and I have scheduled a meeting with him and the superintendent on the 17th of October. So I have scoped what's possible, but I have used that system as a user, and now I want to have a look at that system as extraction information that we can feed into the audit and review process. Within the revised procedure, the PEMS procedure, we are building in a situation whereby I will engage with that office on a quarterly basis to see that those reviews are being done at a divisional level, and where we are not satisfied that they are, or that they're not looking at the right things, it will contain an ability for the policyholder, the Assistant Commissioner, to direct those reviews and direct the type of review to be done to give better oversight and integrity to the system.
Thank you. The recommendations within the Inspectorate report, particularly the recommendation that there should be a full audit carried out, will obviously take a lot of time and resources to actually carry through. I think the authority is concerned that that may not give or provide more immediate response or assurance. Can you tell me, given the risks that there are within the system, how you as an organisation are tackling the deficiencies identified in the short term, and what short-term actions you're taking to try and plug those gaps?
So the first two things we've done is we've done a review of all cash holdings across the country, all of it, and so that has been completed. The second portion of that will be how that's held, because there's different ways to hold cash. But we know exactly what we have, where we have it. So that's held at a local level, a regional level, and in terms of reporting, all the way up to the Commissioner's office. The other thing is in areas where we know we've historically had issues with respect to drugs, we've had very specific audits done regarding what the holdings are. Are there any discrepancies between what's on the system and what we physically have? So we're really doing it in a way that is about identifying where key gaps have been observed and making sure that we're okay in those places. And so those audits have been done. More are forthcoming, because those are just the first two pieces. What Barry is describing is kind of a whole of organization approach, but it's how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So this is how we're doing it.
My understanding was, in terms of the very large sums of cash that you've been holding, that those are now on deposit. Is that not the case? Are you still holding large quantities of cash?
They're held in different ways and different forms, and I'm actually not going to get into that if you don't mind in a public meeting. But we know exactly how much we have and where it is.
Okay, that's fine. The one thing I would say is that it never seems to have been a lack of policy. There seems to be enough policy in and around this area. It seems to be much more an issue, judging by the Inspectorate's report, of the implementation of that policy on the ground and the actual carrying out of the procedures. Can I ask what you're doing beyond reiterating and reissuing policy that actually is giving the local management teams in the local areas the ability or the oversight to actually carry out what the policy says and make sure there's a consistency across the country?
So there's three different things I would say to that. One is there will be a national unit that's been approved, which will help coordinate from the centre. Two, the training piece is really critical in this. As you saw with the reports, that we had difficulty with respect to a training system with respect to the IT, and that's been resolved. And then the third thing I would point to is just the operating model as it gets rolled out. Having a superintendent who is specifically assigned to performance assurance and has to report on a regular basis on key issues, which includes this, will put focus in this area in a way that we can be more assured than we were before.
And can I ask you what you think the time scale is for each of these developments going forward?
Well, the operating model, as you know, we were due to be finished by the end of this year. Our new aims are to be completed by Q1 of next year, so that's in train. The training piece, I know it was close, but
Sorry, yeah, just the training commenced. We had our first round of training there this week, and we have 4 more scheduled for November. We had one originally in October, but we had a difficulty with that. So 4 in November, and that will complete the first.
And how are you doing that, Barry, that rollout? Is it on the basis of need for a particular area? Is it geographic? Is it last in, first out? What basis are you doing the training, can I ask?
The training is being done in consultation with divisional managers. So we've canvassed those as to their training requirements. We have asked them to prioritise the people they want to train in from a PEMS user perspective and a PEMS manager perspective. And they've come back to us, so we're satisfying their demand for training in what we're delivering. We will have complete by the end of November. Our training requirement will be complete.
And then the national unit itself will take a little bit longer, but that'll be based on internal competitions and when we can staff it. But it has been approved.
Okay. There was just a few items regarding PEMS in the action logs in terms of material that was going to be supplied to yourselves. Can you give us some assurance that you're going to follow through on those reasonably soon?
I'm going to ask, can you repeat the question? I don't.
Sorry, it's in the action logs of things that we've agreed at previous meetings. I didn't want to get into the specifics of them. It's just I want to be assured that they are going to follow through with them.
The GARs, you mean, yes? Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
In terms of what
yes.
you're going to supply us, information that we've asked.
Yes, that's not a problem. Thank you.
Okay, I'll thank you and pass on to the chair then.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And as any astute member of the public will observe in our agendas in the last few months for the authority meetings, this has been a constant focus for us and one going forward as well. And I'm now going to turn to Jane Mulcahy, who will speak first, and then to Debbie Donnelly, who are going to talk on the Policing Plan 2025 and commitments to the public and Garda personnel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner and Garda colleagues. Lovely to see you all. Can you tell us what are the key commitments that you are making to the public in terms of the service that will be delivered to them in 2025, please?
Thank you. So for 2025, as you know, as we've is that mic on? It is indeed. We've discussed with yourselves, our intention is to roll over the policing plan from 2024 to 2025 and to maintain the targets that had been previously set. Would you like me to elaborate on some of them?
Yes, please. And maybe explain as well to the public why this decision was made.
Sorry, I switch off my own.
Why the decision was made
Yeah,
to roll over.
why to roll it
I suppose
over?
Maybe I'll explain that first. We're obviously at a very critical time. We're at a critical time for the juncture of the organisation in terms of the commencement of the PSCS bill. And we're at a time of great transition. We will have a new independent board, which is a great opportunity for the organisation. And that new board will need time to work with the leadership team to really engage with the fresh strategy for the organisation and the fresh set of plans. So in consultation with the Policing Authority, we all felt that the right thing to do was to extend the current plans to give the new board, which we understand the appointment would be imminent, time to engage with us and to settle in, so we can take the right step forward, and that we're all taking the first steps forward in the new organisation. So on that basis, we decided that the best thing to do was to continue with the current plan. And I suppose there are a number of themes to the current plan around community, tackling crime and preventative policing, victims and the vulnerable, protecting the security of the state, and sustainable change and innovation. And they are supported by a number of enabling targets, which I presume, the standard ones around people, partnership, engagement, empowerment and trust, including that very important target about health and well-being that you mentioned a while ago. So our proposal is we'll extend those, and that will allow us all a smoother transition into a new way of working.
Thank you, Siobhan. But are there any particular ones that is at this juncture you feel organisationally you're going to particularly tune into?
Yes, and I suppose I can comment on one, particularly around building the capacity and capability of the organisation and resourcing the organisation to the appropriate levels for now and the future, as you know, is a well-documented challenge and a well-documented opportunity for us. So building the capacity and capability of the organisation through recruiting Garda member personnel, Garda staff, and of course the reserve. I would say it's a critical priority for us all and a key risk area that all of us collectively are managing into next year. So I suppose that's one that I would choose, certainly, as a number one.
I know that's an internal perspective. I would just add to that to say that, of course, our focus remains on community, serving victims and the vulnerable. And all of these things align together, because as we build our capacity, it'll help to enable, a strategic focus on those areas so we can serve the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner. And then, in the light of what we've been discussing, I suppose, to date today in relation to public order and the increases in just protest activity more generally, are there other changes perhaps in the policing environment that are impacting on your commitments or causing you to reprioritise certain areas within the plan?
Well, any of these plans are subject to the outside influences of the environment in which we police, and it has to be said that we live in an increasingly unstable world. We have a responsibility, obviously, for national security and the security of the Irish state, and so the geopolitical events, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and the violence in Lebanon, obviously are factors which speak to our overall security and the security of Europe as well, plus then the extent, the huge extent of smuggling of people, crime, and the extent to which Europe is targeted in this, and obviously then that is a policing aspect for us. And beyond that then, the evolving issues there is in respect of drugs, and the devastating effect that drugs is having throughout Europe and North America, and making sure that as best we can we try and combat that problem, particularly by targeting upstream, the major cartels and the importation of drugs, but also then dealing with medium level and street level dealing here in Ireland itself. And in that then, international cooperation across all of those areas is really essential. And beyond that then, we're seeing growth in terms of cybercrime. We're seeing growth as well around violence online. Some of that is around child abuse material online and the proliferation of that material, but also then other violent images proliferated online, and the attempted radicalisation of individuals through violent, desensitising imagery online as well. So there's all sorts of new issues arising for us, but in part then we also have to look to what has worked well for us. The new legislation that's focused on community safety, something which we think is very important around trying to prevent crime, prevent individuals getting to a position where then organised crime groups do prey on them, and where they do become susceptible to drug addiction, and obviously then life-changing impact of that upon them. So there's our operating context has changed hugely over the last, I would say, 6 years since before COVID, and that's likely to keep on changing. And so the plan we have at the moment, obviously it's going to last into 2025, but it'll probably need then a major reworking in terms of just our outside environment, and then how best then we respond to that as an organisation. And as already been said, an important element of that is just the resourcing of the organisation, so we're sufficient strength to deal with the complexity of the policing task, but also the scale of the policing task against increased demand, but also an increased population. And even we see that in terms of road safety and the focus there's been lately around that. To deal with an issue, you have to focus on it, and that involves then deploying resources. So, and making that choice means we do less of something else. And even the scale of the public order commitment that we have means that something less has been done elsewhere. That's inevitable. We're making hard choices about where we deploy our resources to what end.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know Debbie is going to be asking some further questions on resources, but are there any kind of non-operational matters that Gardaí get involved in that have an impact on your kind of numbers on the ground that you might like to draw our attention to, please?
Well, that's been, in effect, a recurring theme for Garda Síochána. To our mind, we are still involved in duties which don't require a warrant card, don't require the warranted powers of a member of Garda Síochána. We still inspect PSV vehicles, for instance, and that's just a relic of a bygone age when maybe in Garda Síochána had the capacity to do that, but we don't have the capacity to do that, and that's 1 or 2 members per division, but that adds up. But even just to provide an example there, as Department of Justice employs individuals to take over immigration registration duties, that's already freed up 2 sergeants and 27 Gardaí. So they've moved from a simple administrative function across to investigating immigration crime, but also then following through on deportation as well. And they've had really good results around review of deportation orders. Some individuals who are subject to deportation orders, for instance, have left this jurisdiction, and we want to be clear actually who is in the jurisdiction that is subject to deportation. Building effective relationships then with the IPAS centres so that we have a fair understanding of what's going on in those centres, and that in part then is intelligence and information for us as well. And then supporting deportation escorts. So, if we free up personnel from functions which aren't, our core function, our core policing function, does mean then that we've increased productivity somewhere else. Like other areas, I would suggest where technology has taken over is around remand appearances in court and the escorting of prisoners backwards and forwards, and that's both the same for adult and juvenile prisoners. And also then we've extensive support to some other agencies, including the Corporate Enforcement Agency, for instance. And whereas that is a law enforcement objective, it is separate from our mission, and we are sending experienced detectives in order to do that. But the other side of that is then there is increased demand for us, both from the National Cybersecurity Centre and the need to investigate online and cyber-related incidents, be it national security or be it in respect of hate crime, etc. So there's additional reporting, there's additional demands being placed upon us, and also then there's always new requirements. New aviation vetting requirements are coming through as well, and so seems to be nearly an insatiable demand for the vetting of individuals, and Garda Síochána has a responsibility for that. So there's a huge amount of our effort isn't just on the simple prevention, detection of crime, patrol, keeping the peace. It is on these ancillary tasks which fall to us as well.
Some of those guards who are doing those tasks right now were not doing them anymore. Would it have potentially a significant impact on, let's say, investigating child sexual abuse imagery? Could they be redeployed into areas where there are skills gaps?
Well, I think if they were freed up for that, they would add then to the our core operational effort, and that is a very wide set of responsibilities. Obviously, then it would be a boost both to local policing provided divisions, but also then to those national specialisms, and that's what we ultimately want to see. It's we are targeting growth of the organisation, but at the same time we want to make sure that we're using all of our staff and Garda members in the most productive way to deliver on the policing mission, and some of the tasks we undertake are sit somewhat outside of that policing mission now.
Much.
Commissioner, just a quick follow-up on focusing on guards doing functions that perhaps do not need Garda powers. For instance, I note that approximately 14% of your overtime is focused on providing court services. So some of the services that you provide, they're a very expensive way of doing that business.
Well, there's a working group underway in respect of that, because there's not a consistency of Garda presence in courts across the jurisdiction. So there is a variation. We have no intention of abandoning courts in terms of our responsibilities in respect of what can be at times a very contentious environment, and we entirely understand that. But there are other functions that we're engaged in which could be better undertaken by other bodies beyond that. For instance, the care of prisoners who may be in a court for a period of time, and there's a variety of models across the country as well that would free up time. Additionally, then that 14% is also made up of court witness, and I think sort of looking forward, if we can minimise the attendance of members of Garda Síochána court, that is actually frees up that resource then for actual policing on the streets or policing in national units, etc. So those are, the use of our workforce. That we are an expensive resource, and we should be directed then towards our core function. Others can take on some of these functions, not saying them all, but could take on some of these functions for the state, and it would be a more cost-effective way of doing it.
And I accept your point that in that 14% for court services, that it encompasses functions that, of course, are the obligations of Garda Síochána to continue. But just instead of talking about percentages, that 14% in monetary terms is how much?
Well, that 14% this year is going to probably, well, it's in the order of 25-26 million euro this year.
Okay.
That's the overtime, not the overall. If you took all the hours of, in effect, playing time, it would be north of that figure again.
So there are discussions to be had, Commissioner, about a more cost-effective manner in providing non-core Garda services to the public.
Yes, and I'm very conscious of the amount of overtime Garda members are working. It's not just a financial issue; it's also a welfare issue, and it's also an operational issue on my ability then to draw down on members should we have the need for emergency response or a surge of personnel or any sort of important response to an incident, that you have members who are fresh and able then to undertake overtime at a given period.
Thank you very much. Debbie Donnelly is now going to ask you some questions, Commissioner, but before she begins, she's going to ask you in particular about the operational model.
There it is. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Commissioner. We are talking about the policing plan, and a core element of that is around the organisational modernisation, which has been underway for a number of years. key element of which is the development of the operation model and the rollout of that, and you anticipate that being finalised next year. Another key element of the policing plan is the engagement with the public and communities. At the Superintendent's Conference this week, there was some commentary about the impact of the operation model on the engagement, the ability to engage communities. Can you comment on that?
Yes, thanks. And the opportunity to speak to the Superintendents Association and their conference yesterday in private session and take questions. And we did touch upon this. But the operating model is for the whole organisation. It's just not about the divisions. It goes some way back. I think if we take a starting point, the 2016 report that the Inspectorate wrote, followed by our own response to that, the Modernisation and Renewal Programme of 2017, and then the Commission on the Future of Policing, which was adopted by the government then in 2018. And all of these reports and several other reports then spoke to the need to address the structure of the organisation, that in effect a lot of what we've already been talking about, new crime types, new demands, etc., were outstripping what had been the traditional response, in that it was entirely focused on the geography of a district. And so we set to unpick that, and in part also then we were responding to internal feedback. The superintendents themselves were saying that they were spending too much time on administrative duties. So every new division now has an assistant principal who takes on, as a Garda staff member, a lot of the administrative functions. Also, there was feedback in respect to the amount of time dealing with discipline issues or complaint issues. And again, then, we have a superintendent, governance and assurance, with specific responsibility for that. But one of the other areas which I found concerning was that a superintendent, no matter what their experience, as a district officer, could find themselves responsible for the investigation of very serious crime, up to and including murder, and indeed a sequence of serious criminality. And so to address that, we've appointed a detective superintendent to all of these divisions throughout the country. There were some here in DMR in 2018. They are now throughout the country. So in effect, we've moved from what was purely a geographic model to a functional model built on divisions. And it's achieved a lot as well in terms of the delivery of local protective service units at a divisional level, at a regional level. We have the cybercrime units. All of that work had been done nationally previously. It has created additional functionality at regional level, and that has allowed then for support for divisions should they need that. But I was a little surprised around some of the feedback and commentary, but at the same time we take it very seriously. But I would say, we've been involved in an ongoing dialogue in respect of this over the last 6 years. We've adopted our plans accordingly, but at the same time, given the change in environment in which we police, the need to be responsive to that, the geographic model just isn't going to cut it in terms of specialisation and the expertise that can't just sit at a national level, has to be available right across the country. And if you have a standardised way of working across the country, then you set a standard and then you work to lift the standard, and that's what we're setting about doing. So that's very clear around the Divisional Protective Service units. We've set a standard, they've been trained, and then we look to see what evolves and how they might be trained to deliver that. And they build up their own expertise as well. So there is, learning, but also then expertise is built up as well. So that's what we seek to develop. At the same time, we have maintained and indeed grown the number of superintendents actually assigned to the divisional model. It's grown from 97 to 106.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to really focus on that engagement with communities piece, has there been any assessment done, particularly within the divisions who have had the operating model longer than others, around improvements, assessments of improvements in terms of the connections with communities? No improvement, or has that been not so good as it was beforehand, before the operating model was introduced?
It's in some ways that's difficult to assess because we've never really we haven't had like a day zero with this or year zero with this. Like, it has evolved as it's gone along. But what we saw with the operating model was that we'd have superintendents who were specifically responsible for community engagement. So do have a geographic area. They're freed of some of the administrative tasks, obviously, and the crime tasks, and then that leaves them then the opportunity, freedom to focus on community issues. But I would then point out to the community policing teams that we've put in place, the additionality we've put in place in terms of supervision. So since 2018, we've an additional 200 sergeants and an additional 200 inspectors as well. And that was all part of just the feedback we received. Again, a lot of it driven from the internal organisation. So I just don't see where there's been this mismatch between our response to the community and the operating model. We've put in place teams, we've put in place supervision in response to that. We've addressed many of the concerns that were expressed in reports and by tribunals in respect of supervision, support for Gardaí on the front line through the presence of sergeants and inspectors, and also then the raising of standards and behaviours as well. So that's all been achieved and delivered upon, and we're in the final really few months of the delivery of the operating model. And yes, I acknowledge we had expected to be probably 1,000 members stronger than we are at the moment in the round, and we still have issues in respect of our estate. But that's the next piece of work, because if we are to continue to grow as our ambition, our estate is also going to have to grow as well. Even to recruit the reserve members and the additional members is going to bring extra couple of thousand into the organisation within a pretty short time scale, maybe 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Commissioner. And maybe just I'll continue on to then talk about some of the core aspects of policing in terms of resources. And many of these aspects have been touched upon this afternoon. In order to deliver the plan, you're stretching yourselves, the resources are being stretched, and some of that gap, that filler, is being addressed through overtime. You've spoken earlier about public order and the overtime required for that and for non-core duties. But what about the rest of the officers and the impact of overtime on them? I suppose there's two parts to my question. The first is the type of analysis that you do internally to understand who's doing the overtime, where it's being done, when it's being done, that type of analysis. And then the second element is the impact on the welfare of officers, and you've spoken a little bit about some officers, but in particularly their environment, the health and safety, and the responsibilities of managers, those at supervisory ranks in relation to that welfare. Thank you.
Thank you. Overtime is a necessary element of any police service. Just the nature of police work means that on a day-to-day basis, there are just ongoing small-scale operational demands that have to be met. Some of that is met through overtime. Even people having to stay on to take an individual to court or to finish off an incident, etc. So there's often just what one might call frictional overtime, which is required then for the organisation to function, and that'll just be a feature. Also then, we provide a quarter-hour overtime every day for all members for briefing purposes. So that's a considerable on-cost that we have, no matter what we do in terms of managing overtime. But we monitor it then by roster, so the 13 rosters in the year, so we can see the trend, and we can see the trend then against previous years. There is an element of this which is seasonal, so we can see spikes in and around Halloween, also in and around Christmas, and increasingly then we're seeing spikes as we're moving into what we might call the concert season as well, where we've large-scale operations in place just to manage nightlife around pretty considerable events here in the city. Specifically then, my office, myself, we monitor the high earners, and so every month then we would examine who the high earners are and see what the trends are in respect of that, but also then bring that to the attention of their line managers in respect of those individuals who I would view as a high earner in the organisation. And there's a couple of elements to this, and you've pointed them out. One is the financial element, just managing our own budget, but secondly, there's a health and safety welfare leg to this, which is really, really important too. And it's just not about the finances, it's about individuals getting the proper rest and the proper break from the workplace. And I'm very conscious at times individuals, members, and a lot of Garda members have been working very excessive hours. So the period after the 23rd of November into early 2024, so large amounts of overtime being worked just to manage public order situation, but also restore some confidence in respect of Dublin and the policing of Dublin, and to reassure people about the safety of Dublin, as well as dealing with the ongoing protests. So necessary, but always an element which has to be observed and managed carefully.
And the individual supervisors of those high earners, and I guess they're high earners often not by choice, but by demand. Volume crimes and increasing. There's sort of new crimes, as you mentioned earlier on, in terms of economic and cyber. There's other demands on you. So demand is increasing in terms of your organisation. The high earners, if we can call them that, but people who work a lot of overtime, how are they cared for? Can you give us an example of how they are cared for and how they and other officers are recognised for that additional work that they do? Thank you.
Well, I think the first point is to try and bring the hours worked back to a more steady state, and so that they get proper rest and can avail of their rest days, etc. And that's in part was certainly the situation in the early part of the year, and just in terms of just bringing things back to a more steady state. And I also say, in terms of the list you were recounting there, that we also have backfill as well, so that we just can maintain, the operational response to calls, etc. So, and that is a draw on our overtime as well. So, but in respect of those who are working long hours, the focus on that is actually as much to give them that sort of welfare support and make sure then that they're getting the proper rest period and in effect can recuperate from having worked such long hours. So we have a overall ceiling. At times it moves between 50 and 70 hours in a 4-week period. So it is quite considerable, and there are then authorisation requirements in respect of the 50 hours and 70 hours as well. You'll have heard some of this in your public order feedback. You work 5 days and public order serial, and you're very close then to breaching the 70 hours, and at times we've had to do that. So like, we're very conscious of that, and that's why then the other side of that is the amount of focus we've put into welfare supports for the organisation and for particularly Garda members and those working long hours.
And does that operate it consistently, that welfare support, consistently across all divisions and units? Well,
I think it does. I do a regular, it's not a dip sample, if people are involved in incidents, I very regularly get in contact with them and see, at least check, if support's been offered to you, and if they've been offered to you, have you required them, and have they been put in place. It's important to get that feedback to make sure that you can see that we're following through on what we've said. So that is happening, that is important. Hopefully that makes a difference in terms of individuals knowing that actually Garda Síochána has care for their actual welfare, particularly when they are working so hard.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Chair. Donald de Butler has an additional question.
Just very, very briefly on this issue of the effect on officers' well-being of excessive working time. I know the European Working Time Directive doesn't apply to the guards, but it provides a useful benchmark about what is regarded as excessive working in other areas. It would be interesting at some stage to find out if you had to comply with that directive, what would be the extent of the issue that you're trying to address? Or perhaps one might, guards are exempt from the Working Time Directive for good reasons, but say you wanted to use it as a guideline to try and address this issue.
Well, I do think it would be a responsible guideline to attempt to meet, but I would have to say nigh impossible at the moment, in that it would suggest about 32 hours per roster, which we couldn't achieve.
That shows the extent of the issue.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I turn to Helen Hall now, our CEO, who's just going to give a brief rundown of the actions.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. There's a few, very few really. The ones I've recorded are 3 for the Commissioner. One, I suppose, to keep us informed on an ongoing basis about the work you're doing from the recent report on the scoping inquiry, historical sexual abuse that we discussed. Then you'll be finalising the policies on public order in the coming weeks. Hopefully we'll get them in 4 weeks' time. And then just lastly, just to provide the outstanding information that was promised from the April and May meeting on PEMS. And just in particular, Anthony mentioned them, that they're on the action register. Just for clarity, the ones he was referring to were the report from the Kilkenny-Carlow division, and then the update on the actions that are being taken from, do you remember the seized drugs in Carlow earlier this year, and you were going to come back to us on that. And then from the authority side, we'll return to the matter of public order in 2025, just I suppose to assess and evidence the practical progress made to implement the outstanding issues that were outlined in our August 2024 report to the Minister. Thanks, Elaine.
If I could address the Carlow-Kilkenny one, because I think there may be confusion about that. A draft review has been done. It's not completed, so that's why it hasn't been sent. Certainly, some of what I referenced today around auditing in key areas where there's been gaps, that has been done in that area. But I can give you a further update, and I don't expect the report to be much longer. Thank you.
And the last item on the agenda, I'm going to talk briefly about the Policing, Security and Community Safety Act that is going to be implemented soon. And so with that in mind, the Policing Authority would like to very much thank the Garda Síochána for your candour and engagement with us and all your stations and units across the country since our existence. And it is one, when we go across the country and go in and ask questions, and we've seen that with the public order report, the honesty and the transparency that you've provided with us we very much appreciate that. We also wish to thank all the stakeholders and the communities who have engaged with us, and we wish to thank them for their dedication in seeking to improve a policing service. And since I have become chair in January of this year, I think the best metaphor I could use about progress in policing is that of a tanker ship. And often you don't see how something so big, such as an organisation like Garda Síochána, can change direction or change course. And sometimes it is not always immediately obvious that change is occurring or impact is occurring. But today we've seen on two issues that are very relevant to the public in terms of PEMS and the integrity of the justice system and how items are kept securely, and also in terms of public order policing. You know, in a short period of time, in a year, we've seen some quite dramatic changes about issues that have never had such big changes occur. And of course, we will be keeping a close eye on those changes and the ongoing progress made in those areas as we continue our work. So just to conclude on that, we wish to say that change is not something always that is fast or immediately obvious, but change can be impactful, and it's something that we look forward to continuing the independent oversight as the policing authority becomes a new authority under the Policing Security and Community Safety Act. So on that, I conclude the meeting, and I think this is the first occasion we've concluded early. So thank you for your contributions today.